Okay, so Tanse, hello everyone. My name is Lorisia MacLeod and I will be your presenter for today's short micro-learning, More Than Personal Communication, Citation Templates for Elders and Knowledge Keepers. So let's hop right into it. First of all, a little bit about me. I'm currently the Online Reference Center Coordinator at the Alberta Library. I'm a member of the Smith Cree Nation, and I recently finished my MLAS. Well, I guess it was 3 years ago now, so maybe not so recent, depending on how you count years, from the University of Alberta. And I'm actually a third-generation library worker. So you'll see on the left there is a picture of my dad and my sister. My sister's currently working on her Master's of Library and Information Studies at the U of A as well. And then on the right, a picture of me and my dad. And he's an alumni of the exact same Master's of Library and Information Studies program. So we're a biblio dynasty, what can I say? And, you know, library stuff was always really important to my family. Who's reading the books, who's in the books, everything like that, I guess was something I kind of got taught from a very early age. It was just a part of the life around me, which I think impacted how this all came about, which I'll get into. So because terminology can vary from place to place, I always like to kind of just have a moment where I go over how I'm using this particular terms I'm using. So in this case, I'm going to use the term Indigenous as sort of an umbrella term to refer to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. That being said, I recognize that obviously there are varied differences between not only those three groups, but also within those groups themselves, there are communities that have different practices, etc. The terminology of elder or knowledge keeper was what I chose to express an individual of an Indigenous community with traditional knowledge or stories. And of course, the definition of traditional can be rather wide and varied. Doesn't necessarily mean old. In fact, it might, be a very modern teaching, but because it's connected culturally, it has that traditional element. So I chose to use the term elder or knowledge keeper because some communities have very specific criteria for their elders. Others don't have a term that really equates to elder per se, and I wanted it to be as flexible and inclusive as possible. And then, yeah, when we talk about stories or oral histories or teachings, in this case, I'm going to be talking about Indigenous knowledge often transmitted orally or in a narrative format. So specifically, that's what these citation templates are really hitting on. All right, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of it. I hope everyone's super excited to talk about citation. So, as was mentioned in the summary for this micro-learning, these were templates that were created while I was working at the NorQuest College. And I worked with the Indigenous Student Centre staff to develop them, to talk about what sort of elements were important, and then they were put up on the NorQuest Library citation libguides. So just so you know what we're kind of talking about, you can see on the left I've shown what the APA guide has. So these were actually developed when APA 6 was out. In that case, there wouldn't have been any mention of the nation at all. APA 7 has made a change where in the InText citation, they recommend naming the community the person is a member of, if possible, which I do think is a step in the right direction. But as you'll see when we talk about what these citation templates look like, it's a little bit more than just one step in the right direction to go with these templates. So because as you can see with the APA guide, you would not have a reference included for something like an orally transmitted teaching. In general, they say if it's something that's recorded or there's a transcript, then that's something that is applicable for being in the reference list. But if it's something where I believe their phrasing that they use to describe why it's only an in-text is referring to it as non-replicable knowledge. So it's knowledge that someone else couldn't get. Because I guess because of the ephemeral nature of oral teachings, maybe. But with the NorQuest template that you see on the right-hand side, we have an InText citation that very closely mimics that of, a book or any other type of resource, and then a reference citation. So that's really the part that's super new. That reference citation that includes some information that is really based on the relationships around that person and that teaching. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about the different pieces, but just to give you an idea what we're talking about. We also made it for the MLA style. And the reason for choosing APA and MLA is that those are the two citation styles that were used at NorQuest. I have made kind of an open-ended promise if there is anyone working at other institutions that wants to look at creating something like this for, if they use Chicago or American Anthropological Association or, other specialized styles, I'm more than happy to work with folks on that too. But the APA and MLA was because that was what we used. So before I get into the details of the nitty-gritty of what makes up those reference citations, I wanted to kind of step back and talk a little bit about the why. Probably some of this will be preaching to the choir because you really probably know a bit about why. But really, I like to say, why did we need to do something like this? Because it's 2020. When I first created these slides about this, that said because it's 2019. It really is my opinion that at this point, at 2020, when we're talking about indigenizing the academy and we're talking about reconciliation, it's about time that we in academia need to reconcile the fact that we have a major discomfort when it comes to oral knowledge, and there is a historically built opinion that oral knowledge is treated differently than written knowledge. And I don't know that we recognize that a backbone in that difference in treatment is this like colonialist ideal of written knowledge. I really love this phrase from this book. It's talking about oral history being used in law trials in particular, but I really like this concept. What we take to be the permanence of writing is associated with serious intellectual activity. I think this is the trap that we fall into a lot in academia. We believe because something is written down, it's somehow, everybody can find it and it's somehow more permanent or real as knowledge. And it's somehow better knowledge and should be treated with more gravitas than something that is orally exchanged. And that really is based in a very European-centric way of thinking. So when I talk about the why, it really boils down to we do it because it's 2020 and students deserve better. When you're talking about Indigenous students who are already facing all of these other challenges, or some of them, a lack of representation in professors, colonial systems, microaggressions, lateral violence, there's so many different studies that talk about all the barriers and hoops that Indigenous students have to jump through. I really start to question, why would we not try and break down any of those barriers that we can? So this is an example, like a personal example for me. I'm an urban-born Indigenous person. So I was born and raised in Edmonton. And if I wanted to use what I've been taught by academia and librarians is the good place on the internet to look for information, for good, credible information, I use my library database. This is the NEOS database. So this is a huge collection of resources. And let's say I search my nation's title or my nation's name, James Smith Cree. I come up with 231 results. What I can't quite show in this is that a lot of them have to do with the oil spill that you see mentioned in the second example. Like it's a lot of oil spills, water concerns. It's kind of all there is. If I limit it to, if I limit it to, okay, show me academic journals. Don't show me those news stories that are just about that one oil spill and for some reason there's 50 plus newspaper articles about it. Show me academic journals. Show me where me and mine are in academia. I get 3 in all of NEOS. Great work for the ones that did this, talking about Indigenous futurisms, talking about Indigenous prairie life, those kind of things. Great, but why is there only 3 that come up when I look for my own people? I know my nation. I know we have language keepers. We have people who have so many stories to tell. And yet what we're seeing in the library system doesn't match with my understanding of what my community is. So imagine if I was completely disconnected and this was the only thing I knew about my community. Well, I would think we're nothing but oil spills and water concerns. And that's a problem. So really it boils down to this concept that indigenization, reconciliation, decolonization, without having meaningful action to back them up, these words are just words. Pretty words, but just words nevertheless. So I felt like libraries needed to be a major part of making sure those words were something more. And in particular, regarding citation, I think libraries and librarians have more power than we tend to recognize. We are often seen as the citation authority. In many institutions, we're the ones dealing with citation questions or citation libguides. And implementing or pushing citation styles to really look at improving what they're doing and moving forward faster is really in line with our value of social justice and advocacy. And so to me, it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense to me that we look at creating something that would allow people to more culturally responsively and respectfully cite an oral teaching. So let's talk a little bit about the how. I won't bore you with too many of the details, but so when we actually published them, we did publish them right into the APA and MLA citation guides. It was really important that these be treated just like every other type of resource and knowledge piece that people could be using. So for example, you'll see we put it under audio, video, image materials because we thought people might look there, but it is treated just the same as someone going looking for a music recording or an audio recording. We did the same with MLA. And we did put a little bit of phrasing around it because in discussions with the Indigenous Student Centre, I said, hey, do you think this would be an appropriate part to include a little note recommending that if they're going to approach an elder or knowledge keeper for teachings to consider protocol? and put some phrasing around that, kind of helping to ladder in that teaching of how do you go about getting these knowledges, because not everybody has had access to learn about what protocol is, when you should be giving protocol, anything like that. They were like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So that got included in there, and Dolores Cardinal is actually the elder that you see presented there, and I did speak with her beforehand to ask for her permission to use her name and her as an example in this. So that was really important as well. Yeah, okay, so let's talk a little bit about what this is made up of. So the InText citation ends up looking just like any other sort of resource, a book, a journal article, very similar to those. It's really the reference citation that changes. You have last name, first initial for APA. Then we start to dig into the relationship element. I should also mention regarding the names that there isn't a requirement for this to be the government recognized name either. I will be working on a paper where I specify that there is flexibility around that. If, for example, there is a name in their language that they would like to be referred to for the citation. The concept of the citation itself being a bit flexible and requiring conversation is going to be an element that comes up a lot. Then you have the nation or community that they're from. This is kind of fulfills two major things, three really. First of all, it's a recognition of that relationship. If they're an elder or knowledge keeper, they're not that alone. It's in connection to their nation or community, which kind of leads to the second piece. This helps break down the concepts of pan-indigeneity, the concept that, oh, well, all Indigenous people are the same, or even, oh, well, all Crees have the same teachings. We don't. So this allows people to really see that there is variation. And third, in particular, for those who are members of the community looking for resources about their community or voices from their community, it allows that to come up in full text, like full text documents and everything like that. So if it was in the library system, it would be able to search that and pull that up, and then you have more than 3 academic journals with it. We included treaty territory if applicable. So for some people, and especially some teachings, the concept of the treaty that it's in relation to may be very important, especially if you're talking about oral teachings about treaties. But in some cases, it may not be applicable. So that's why that if applicable. City or community that they live in, if applicable. I was asked to include this because the physical space can also have an impact on the teachings that they have, the teachings they can share, and everything. So to include it if applicable. The topic or subject of communication, if applicable. So this is an excellent spot if, for example, it's a story that they specifically really want to make sure that it's acknowledged that this is a story this is a story that they were taught or passed down from their, their grandfather, if they want to specifically indicate kind of the history of that story in a very, if they want that right there, that's an excellent spot to include it. We did include personal communication with a lowercase p because that is how it appears in the APA InText Citations. So that's mostly there as a nod to APA of, okay, we know what your official version looks like. We recognize that. We're doing something different. In the long run, if APA decided to adopt something like this, I would hope to see that no need for that any further. And then month, date, year, which of course can also be important if we're talking about stories that can only be told at certain times of the year. Here I have the MLA example. You can see it follows very much the same sort of format. The only difference is that it's been put into mesh with MLA format. So, you know, last name, comma, first name rather than first initial, because that's MLA standards. So the point was to make these reference citations so that they would fit well within a reference list. They wouldn't stand out, they would be treated as equals. Like to kind of joke, oh, but wait, does this mean scholars will have to actually talk with the people that they're, you know, talk with knowledge keepers about what elements are applicable and how they would like to be cited? And I'm like, yeah, and maybe it's about time. I think sometimes we think citation, especially reference citation, is a one-way street, and maybe it shouldn't be, especially for elements like this. I think that if more knowledge keepers and elders were engaged with how they would like to be cited, we could see even improvements to this template that would make it more beneficial for everyone. You know, I think maybe that is a question that should be asked a lot more than it has been. Looking forward. Oh, I know, I will quickly wrap up. Okay, so looking forward, as far as I know, it is currently used and linked at about, well, you see the list there. Lots and lots of different institutions. I think over 25 at my last count. It's under consideration at 2 others. And some were just kind of waiting to see what new APA 7 would come out with. A lot of what I heard was, if it doesn't have a reference citation, we're going to want to use these templates, because it really is that element of equality of treatment of these knowledges, where just because Shakespeare's written doesn't make it any more valuable than an elder's story that's been passed down for twice as many years as Shakespeare's stories. Neither one is better or worse than the other, but they should be treated equally as important knowledge. And just give you an idea of, kind of on a map, where we're talking about, so you can kind of see it has sort of spread. It started at Little Community College in Edmonton, and it's really expanded across. You know, I've had Maori librarians ask me about it as well. So it has legs. And one key thing that I do like to point out is that it's not only for Indigenous scholars. My background is in anthropology, archaeology, and there are a lot of non-Indigenous scholars there who are trying to do culturally relevant and connected work, and are trying to do it in a very respectful way. So it's really for anyone who is engaging with Indigenous communities to help empower them to properly treat their community members' knowledges with the most respect possible. Honestly, it probably is citation templates that, you know, if you took one big school, a random school, the U of A, with lots of different students doing lots of different things, sure, maybe 1% or less of students are actually going to use these in their assignments. But for those students who want to use it, it's going to mean a lot that there is actually something written in. There is a recognition of their knowledge. And for 100% of the students who ever see it, it reminds them that there is these knowledges, or rather that there are these knowledges, and that they are important and valuable and should be treated as such. Even if they never end up using them in their academic careers, it reminds them that this is a relevant knowledge form that needs to be recognized. And I think that's really important, rather than leaving it to Indigenous masters and PhD students to battle individually for the ability to cite their elders and knowledge keepers in their thesis, which many, many have done. There should be something like this that is broader, that is institutionalized, that is just there from the start. So really that is the key. So there we go.
So thank you, Lorisia. Don Smale It's a goal to move these templates out from under personal communications and to their own section.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, Lorisa, Don would like to know, is it a goal to move these templates out from under personal communications and to their own section?
So a personal goal that I would like to see is I would like to see them implemented as just being one of the examples of, you know, like you have a reference, here's how you do a reference citation for a book with one author. I'd like to see, here's how you do a reference citation for Indigenous elder or knowledge keeper. So yeah, really moving it out of that personal communication. I'd love to see it eventually make its way into the official formats to really be considered equal with the rest, yeah.
Brownwin, thank you, Larissa. I work at the UBC Vancouver in Vancouver. We ran a few citation workshops before the pandemic, and we used your templates in the workshops. This discussion has answered some common questions about citing elders and knowledge keepers that we get at the reference desk. A lot of folks who come to us use Chicago citation style. Would love to see a Chicago template someday. Larissa, work for you, huh? Are you in the
Thank
process?
you, yeah.
Are you in the process of coming up with a Chicago style template too?
As I said, with it being kind of birthed out of NorQuest where they didn't use Chicago, it has been limited by that, but I am, as I said, willing to work with, if there's an institution that uses Chicago and would like to work on kind of altering it slightly to fit within the Chicago format, I'm more than happy to work on that because yeah, I'd really love to see it in every citation style, really.
Devin Murphy, she's from United States. Her comment is, "This was amazing. I did not know it was included on Purdue OWL. I wonder if the acceptance there can push their wider use or consideration in the United States."
Yeah, that was a really fantastic moment because when we released them online, I did reach out to Purdue OWL to ask about it. I forget what exact page it's on, but they include a note of it. Basically, it's kind of like on one of the pages talking about individual institutions may also have additional templates that they recommend. And they mention this one in particular and include links. So it was very exciting. And I know for them it was connected to wanting to be more inclusive and equitable. So yeah.
So Larissa, please could you paste your LibGuide where you had this page in the chat so we all can go and link it to our library page?
For sure. I'll just stop sharing for a moment to do that. NorQuest will be coming out with their APA 7 libguides. So currently they're still using the 6 and working on updating the 7th. But once I have been told that it will also be appearing in the APA 7 guides when they're available as well.
Kerry Cornelis from Haskell Indian Nations University comments, "This is really exciting. I'd like to propose this to our faculty. Thank you so much."
That would be great.
Stevie mentions fantastic. A great example of how decolonizing libraries is something that can happen in every aspect of the work. This gives us some ideas regarding our own collections. So I'm going to stop the recording.